Give the floor to our friend from Norway, Glenn Diesen. He's going to share the summit with you.
My name is Glenn Diesen. I'm a professor of political economy from Norway. And as our panel was on Eurasian security, I would just like to outline three main points. The first was that the source of conflict today appears to be a conflict between unipolarity and multipolarity. Now, to a large extent, this represents a new phenomenon in international affairs. As in the 19th century, we had the United States as a dominant maritime power in conflict with the Russian Empire as the dominant land power. In the 20th century, we had the United States as the dominant maritime power against the Soviet Union. And in the present time, it's somewhat different, as we have the United States, again, as the dominant maritime power. But on the Eurasian continent, we're now seeing the emergence of multipolarity, which also presents a lot of new opportunities, because even the largest economy, China, doesn't really have the capability, or it doesn't even display the intention of attempting to dominate this continent. Instead, we see initiatives being put in place for a multipolar Eurasia. So this puts us, therefore, in a conflict between a unipolar system attempted to be restored by the United States versus a multipolar system. And the global majority seems to obviously prefer the multipolarity, which is why I think BRICS has been such a great attraction to many countries. However, in our discussions, we also discovered a consensus that there was some concerns, or at least a desire for Eurasia to be an anti-hegemonic movement as opposed to being anti-Western, as the objective should be to harmonize interest and end this era of bloc politics as opposed to Eurasia merely becoming a bloc. And again, the attraction of BRICS countries towards these Eurasian formats largely rested on this idea that we could overcome the bloc politics rather than succumbing to it. The second point we had was that the appeal of Eurasia is also, to a large extent, the multi-vector foreign policy. This is the ability to diversify economic connectivity with all the major poles of power. And this is seen as a necessity to, or a requirement to have more political independence, to have more autonomy in foreign policy, and not merely be a spectator in international affairs. And yet again, this is why most countries do not want to choose between competing blocs, but instead find a way of harmonizing. And again, the global majority wants Eurasian multipolarity, as this is a requirement for genuine multilateralism and not the false one, which has often been promoted under Washington. The third and final point was that the multipolar Eurasia has certain systemic incentives for harmonizing interests, because the great powers in Eurasia, they have somewhat different formats for Eurasian integration. They have different interests. We can see this also with Russia and China, but we also see that none can really pursue their objectives or formats for integration without cooperation with these other centers of power. So this creates incentives to harmonize interests, and it seems that this is also what has made BRICS successful. As I remember a decade ago, many people expected Central Asia to be a clash point between China and Russia. Instead, we see it becoming an area of cooperation instead. So this gives optimism to other parts of Eurasia as well. And this is drastically different from the alliance system, which is usually used to advance unipolarity. In your own speech, you refer to the imperial impulse of dividing countries. So under the alliance system, there's always an interest in having division between China and India, between the Arabs and the Iranians, between Europe and Russia, simply because this helps to divide the region into dependent allies and weakened adversaries. So, so in the spirit of harmonizing interest, I also had a question premised on the inability we've had in Europe to establish a mutually acceptable post-Cold War settlement after the Cold War. And I think this has been a source of many of our tensions. We never established a system based on indivisible security. Instead, we returned to bloc politics and abandoned some of the hopes we initially had in the early 90s by instead going with NATO expansion. So my question was if Eurasian multipolarity can offer a different format for cooperation between Russia and Europe as well. I ask this because I had a few years ago a book with the title Europe as the Western Peninsula of Greater Eurasia, and I was wondering on your opinions if you see any possibility for such a path forward. Thank you.
Прошу прощения.
Please forgive me. Sorry. Could you please repeat what you were saying in the end? Could you formulate the question yet again, please?
Sorry. Well, my question was premised on the idea that across Eurasia we've seen many countries being able to overcome their differences, their political differences, through economic connectivity. We see this, for example, the deals the Chinese were promoting between the Arabs and the Iranians. And I was wondering if some format for Greater Eurasia, in which Europe would be a part of this Greater Eurasia, if there's some ability to use this BRICS or some other institutions to also foster better relations with Russia and Europe, so we can overcome this bloc politics in Europe, which we never were able to overcome after the Cold War.
Вы знаете, после того, как холодная война закончилась,
after the Cold War ended, there was a chance to overcome this bloc thinking and the bloc politics. I can repeat it. After the Cold War came to an end, there was a chance to overcome the bloc mentality and the bloc politics. However, as I mentioned in my statement, I'm quite sure that the US simply didn't need that. It seems that they were possibly scared that they would lose control over Europe. They wanted to maintain it, and they're still doing so. Moreover, they strengthened their grip over it. But I wanted to say that at some point, it would lead to the weakening of that principle of complete subjugation. You know, what I'm saying right now is not anything bad. I don't want to, blame someone or anything, God forbid. But we see that many European countries, most of European countries that are NATO members, to the detriment of their interest, are conducting actions that benefit the US politics and the US economy. Well, look, the US, in certain states of the US, the energy costs 3 or 5 times less than in the European Union. So the decision is being made deliberately in the tax system. They're decreasing the revenue tax. For example, they create the conditions for the transition of whole sectors of economy, of whole industries towards the US, and some of them do move. First, that applied to those who were dealing with primary energy sources, that is, fertilizer productions as well as glass production and some other industries. They simply rolled back their activity because it was not profitable anymore. They're moving over the ocean. Now they're doing the secondary industries. More or less, it has to do with metallurgy and the car industry and so on. The governments can blame all they want, the ineffective management of the companies, of specific companies, but it has to do with the government policy, first and foremost. And in those conditions, the management of the companies had to do something to defend, to protect jobs and their companies. But it's not always possible, though. Therefore, the conflict that unfortunately we're seeing today, that we're unfortunately taking part in, that allowed the US, to achieve the strengthening of their leadership, to put it mildly, have almost a colonial dependence of the countries. Honestly, even I didn't expect that. The same is happening to Japan. It's surprising. What did we do to Japan? Nothing. Not a single step, not a single word. But they introduced sanctions against it. How come? Where did that come from? Hence the question, what do we do with that? Well, we didn't do anything. Are there colleagues from Japan? Possibly there would be some questions from them. And it's even worse with Europe. I have already said it, but I will not refrain from the pleasure of thinking back to my conversation in 1993 with ex-Chancellor Kohl. I had the chance to be present at the conversation with the former mayor of St. Petersburg. Back in the day, I still had some German in me, and I acted as an interpreter between them. He let go of the interpreter and he said, "Go and take a rest." I stayed and I interpreted for them. For me, as who was a former member of external intelligence of the Soviet Union, it was so surprising to hear what he was saying. To be honest, I was listening to them, I was interpreting. And to put it mildly, I was extremely surprised. Because I still had cliches of the Cold War mentality in my head. I was a member of intelligence of KGB of USSR, and all of a sudden, Chancellor Kohl started saying that the future of Europe, if it wants to preserve itself as an independent center of European civilization, the future is only with Russia. We need to bring together our efforts. I was simply agape. He continued in the same vein, and he spoke about his vision about the development of situation on the American continent, the way the U.S. will continue to build its policy. Well, I will not give it verbatim. Well, he didn't say anything bad about the U.S., but he simply gave his expert opinion, not just as chancellor, but more like an expert. And in essence, I think 85 or 90% what he spoke about is happening. I can see it, and everyone can see it as well. And naturally, we should try to build a security system on Eurasian continent. It's tremendous in size. And naturally, Europe can, and I believe should be, a part and parcel of that system. I jotted it down. The PRC does not have a chance and doesn't want to play a dominating role. You said you spoke about Central Asia as well. And I will mention it too. I think there are certainly our friends from China here. The Chinese philosophy does not have that. They do not strive for domination. That's the trick. That's the attraction of the theory, of that proposal that has been worded by President Xi. One belt, one road. One belt, one common road. This is not a Chinese road. This is a common road. Everyone's road, at least bilaterally. That's the way it sounds, and that's the way we behave, in the interests of each other. What's happening in Central Asia? Everyone expected some kind of a clash or collision between Russia and China in Central Asia. Well, look, the thing is that these countries are very young in their statehood, and they have economies that requires significant development. Demographic processes are afoot there. For example, take Uzbekistan. Every year, they add another million of population. Can you imagine that? 27 or 28 million, that's already the population, and they have an extra million born each year. India has plus 10, as my friend Prime Minister Modi spoke, but India has 1.5 billion people living there. And Uzbekistan has about 38. Now they soon have to have 40 million. That's a lot of millions. They have plenty of issues. And if the People's Republic of China comes over there and helps out those economies, and that means that as a result of economic cooperation, the domestic political processes stabilize as well. The statehood is stabilized. Russia only has an interest in that. We want to have a stable situation there, stable development. It's in our interests as well. Therefore, the competition is absent there. We only have cooperation. It doesn't stand in the way of developing development of our traditional development of ties with that region of the world. And the countries of Central Asia that for hundreds of years have been part of the Russian Empire and of the Soviet Union not only remember well, but they cherish our special contacts and special ties. And it benefits everyone. And if we create a security system in the Eurasian continent, and incidentally, I see and I hear that certain European countries are starting to talk about the single security system from Lisbon to Vladivostok yet again. Now they are going back to what de Gaulle spoke about. He talked about Urals, but we need to talk about Vladivostok as the end point. They have these ideas again. If our counterparts will go back to that, and most importantly, as you said, what I've mentioned and what's written down in the OSCE documentation, that the security of one country does not come at the expense of the other, of security of the other country. It's crucial. If we can truly do that, you have mentioned the level of trust that needs to be increased. And I think that the most important issue on Eurasian continent between Russia and the European countries is the deficit of trust. You can blame Russia for many things, and possibly we make mistakes as well. But when we're being told that we signed the Minsk agreement, we're being told that they signed the Minsk agreements only to give time to Ukraine to rearm, and they never intended to solve this conflict peacefully. How can we trust them? Look, guys, what kind of trust can we talk about? You've publicly said that you've fooled us, that you've lied to us, and you deceived us. What kind of trust are we talking about? But we need to go back to that system of mutual trust with time. I don't know, we can discuss it till early hours of the morning, but it's the first step to create a single Eurasian security system. Is it possible or no? Chancellor Kohl, whom I spoke about at the beginning, said that it's not just necessary, but it's an imperative, and I share his point of view.